Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. Good evening. My name is Susie Cohen Crumpler. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director of the Cal Alumni Association at UC Berkeley. This evening, I am wearing a black turtleneck and a brown blazer. I have long hair, light colored skin, and I am also wearing a bright gold bear pin on my lapel. I'm so thrilled to be with all of you for our fourth edition of Cal for All. Tonight, we are focusing on advancing sustainable and equitable futures. Cal for All is a collaboration between the Cal Alumni Association, our Cal alumni chapters, our campus partners, and alumni leaders from across the globe. This virtual series is aimed at creating a more inclusive alumni community. We bring together Cal alumni from diverse backgrounds to discuss diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice, DEI-BJ. If you have joined us for a previous edition of Cal for All, welcome back, and thank you for your continued participation in this very important program. To those of you who are joining us for the first time this evening, we welcome you to this space to listen and to learn, and also to participate by asking questions. Tonight, we will learn from our panel of distinguished alumni who embody UC Berkeley's commitment to driving positive local and global change, and they will share their professional experiences from economic development to community building to global philanthropy. To our speakers, our panelists, our facilitators, we are honored that you are here this evening, and I am looking forward to the upcoming discussion. I will now pass it over to my colleague, Joanna Jojo Aguirre, who will be sharing our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Susie. We recognize that Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the historic and sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. I'll turn it back to Susie.
Thank you so much, Jojo. It is now my pleasure to introduce Lachelle Blakemore, class of 1989. Lachelle is the Associate Vice Chancellor of Development for Berkeley's University Development and Alumni Relations Unit. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Lachelle. And to everyone, go Bears.
Thank you, Susie. Hello, everyone. It is just a privilege to be here with you all tonight. This is our first of many Cal Homecoming weekend activities. And I also send greetings from Chancellor Rich Lyons, who regrets that he is unable to be here with us tonight. You may know that Rich was the inaugural fireside chat speaker for the Cal for All program, and he is thrilled to see this tradition continue with such momentum. So he sends his best and a Go Bears from Chancellor Lyons. Today, we celebrate not only the enduring strength of our alumni community, but also of the impactful leadership that guides us forward. And I would like to take a minute to extend a special thanks to Susie for her extraordinary service as Executive Director of the Cal Alumni Association. Her vision and dedication have had lasting impact, and we are all grateful for all that Susie has done. So thank you, Susie. And I want to recognize the distinguished speakers joining us today, including my classmate, Yvette Gullatt, a triple bear. Yvette, you'll hear more about her from in a minute, but Yvette has 3 degrees from Berkeley, and she has the equivalent of 3 jobs. I don't know how she does it, but Yvette is a Vice President for Graduate and Undergraduate Affairs, Vice Provost for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and Chief Diversity Officer for the University of California System. Additionally, I want to send warm welcome to our alumni panelists, Kate, Wayne, Renee, and to our panel moderator, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion, Dr. Amber Johnson. I just think it's extraordinary that we have such amazing individuals leading this conversation. So I would now like to introduce Marcia Roberts, MD, class of 1990. And Marcia serves as the Vice President for the Cal Alumni Association Board of Directors. Marcia is Chief of Radiology at Kaiser Permanente for the Diablo service area. And she oversees radiology operations for 2 hospitals and 7 outpatient imaging centers. Marcia is also an elected director on the Permanente Medical Group Board of Directors, and she serves where she is serving Northern California physicians who work at Kaiser. Marcia earned her BA in molecular biology from Cal in 1990. She then went on to earn her medical degree from Yale University School of Medicine. She completed her residency and training in diagnostic radiology at UC San Diego, where she was a chief resident and did a fellowship at UCSD in interventional radiology. Marcia practiced diagnostic and interventional radiology at John Muir Hospital before joining Kaiser in 2011. So Marcia, thank you so much. And thank you all to all of our panelists and leaders. Thank you, and go Bears.
Thank you, Lachelle, for that kind introduction, and hello, everyone. I am thrilled to be here with you today as part of this important discussion. As a physician, I strive for equitable healthcare in our communities. After years of research, we know the social determinants of health have a major impact on people's health, well-being, and quality of life. Education, including access and quality, is one of the 5 domains of social determinants. People with higher levels of education are more likely to be healthier and live longer. As someone deeply passionate about promoting equity in both health and education, I am honored to introduce today's fireside chat speaker, Dr. Yvette Gullatt, a trailblazing leader in higher education whose work has transformative impact on the entire University of California system. We've already heard about all of your roles where you oversee system-wide programs and initiatives that enhance student success and matriculation. As was previously mentioned, Dr. Gullatt earned her bachelor's, master's, and Ph.D. in English from UC Berkeley, go Bears. Her leadership and vision have been instrumental in shaping the UC system's efforts to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion, impacting the lives of thousands of students from underrepresented backgrounds across the state of California. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Yvette Gullatt. I also, before we dive into today's exciting discussion, I'd like to pass the baton to our wonderful host for this fireside chat, Cathy Han. Cathy is the Chief Learning Officer of IFC Global, a leading sustainability, advisory, and leadership development firm. She has extensive experience in consulting and executive management across technology, education, and nonprofits, with her work spanning New York, Silicon Valley, and the Asia Pacific. As a proud alum of Berkeley, Columbia, and the London School of Economics, Cathy has built an impressive career championing inclusive economic development, sustainability, innovation, and community empowerment on a global scale. Beyond her professional work, Cathy is also deeply committed to advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice across Berkeley alumni community. She serves as CAA's lead DEI-BJ Alumni Chapter Advisor and Board Secretary for the Cal Alumni Club of New York. Cathy has taken a leadership role in introducing innovative DEI-BJ aligned training, including the Designing for the Future workshops for CAA's senior management team and staff. These workshops have enhanced the strategic work of our association and fostered a more inclusive culture within CAA. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Cathy Han.
Thank you, Marsha. Thank you for the nice introduction. So before we kick off the fireside today, I really want to welcome all of you join us for the homecoming edition of Cal for All. This is really a wonderful occasion where we all join from all around the world, from across the country, to hear from Berkeley leaders, visionary leaders, and change makers in terms of how we can really spread the impact of Berkeley across campus, but also beyond. So today we're really honored to have Dr. Yvette Gullatt, who is a triple bear, who's really spent almost 4 decades in the, between UC Berkeley and the UC system to really drive systematic change. And really we want to, from this fireside chat, really learn from her and her leadership journey and how we can work together and collaborate together to drive DEI-BJ for all. So Yvette, we want to start the fireside chat with the first question about your Berkeley journey. You spent, between your late 80s, early 90s, and early 2000s at Berkeley as a student. Were there any special moments or experiences that define who you are today as professional or a person? Could you share some specific example so we can learn from your journey?
Sure, I'm happy to. And Cathy, thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy and truly humbled to be with you today. And I want to start with the conversation you and I had as we prepared for this, that even though we finished more than a decade apart from each other, we shared the common experience of being lonely when we first got to Berkeley. We found Berkeley to be an intimidating, not hostile place, but a hard place to find belonging. And so when I think about the experiences that have shaped my personal and professional journey, they really are about where I found belonging in the institution. And there were 2 of them. One was my work-study job in the English department, which was a great job, and I'll tell you why. The faculty drop their books in a box in the department, or at least they used to back in the 80s. And my job was to take their books and return them to the library. So I crossed the path over to Doe and I returned their books. But on the way, I got to see what the faculty read. And it was so exciting that they were reading so many interesting things. And I wanted to be like that. I wanted to read those books. And so, I came back a couple more times to Cal for the opportunity to do that. And the second thing that I did was, as I worked in the English department, I learned about a course. We would call it experiential learning now today, but at the time it was one of those courses where you could get credit, and I needed some credit, and you could learn about composition and composition theory and put that into practice. And so I took a job at the Student Learning Center and I became a tutor. And what that exposed for me was how very different we are when we come to our educational opportunities, but that there is talent all over the place, but that our schooling doesn't necessarily give the opportunity for all of that talent to rise. And the Student Learning Center became my first professional job after I graduated. And so for me, both of those spaces helped me, one, belong at Cal, and I know you found them in the Haas School as well, but they also fostered for me how important it is to support the intellectual growth of all of our students. Because the people that I met in both of those places, one of the people whose books I would carry over to the library became Chancellor Carol Christ eventually. But they all had a really strong sense of servingness, right? That we were using our education to give back to the community. And that was really powerful for me as a student. And it's what I admire so much about the university, about Cal, and about the students who go on to great careers, because there's such a sense of servingness and purpose in them.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Yvette, for sharing those stories. Because that really leads to kind of our next, question about how did being a student at Berkeley influence the way you approach leadership, right? Because you mentioned about being able to see students from different backgrounds, how what will be a good way to bring them together while honoring their diversity, right? So could you speak about kind of how did your student experience, especially across 3 different decades of experience on campus, really inform your leadership, especially now in the higher education space and also in the space of equity and inclusion?
Sure. So I will tell you what I think my approach to leadership is. I'm not sure the people I lead, I think the same thing, but I will say I'd like to think that my approach to leadership is collaborative, that it's aimed at clearing the barriers for others to achieve success. And I think that because at Cal, there were so many different kinds of people from so many different backgrounds, that really meant something to me. And I'll tell you, when I came to Cal, not many people know this, I was a transfer from a small Midwest college. And back in those days, you used to get your financial aid refund in a check, right? So it didn't come in your direct deposit, it was a check. And you had to go get your check. So I'm passing by Sproul Hall, and there's this long line going out the door, down the stairs to the plaza. And I see this line. I'm like, I wonder what that line is for. So I go up the stairs, and that line continues all the way up. And I go to the front of the financial aid office, and I knock on the little door. And the woman says, what do you want? And I said, I'm here for my check. And she goes, you have to get in line. And I went, everyone here gets financial aid? Where am I? I'm with my people, right? Because at my old college, no one got financial aid. They basically brought that check to my dorm room. That is how few people were on aid. And so there was this homogeneity about the people at that college. But at Berkeley, it was such a range of people. And, in my first stint as an undergraduate, I was at Cal during the South African apartheid protests, for example. And what I experienced was students changing the future of the university through their actions. And that's always been inspiring to me, that alone we can do some things, but together we can do a lot. So collective action, collective engagement, bringing a variety of perspectives and beliefs to the table to make decisions has been one way that I try to lead. And I really do attribute that to the shaping of my consciousness that I experienced while I was a student at Berkeley.
That's wonderful. And that really informs kind of the work you do on day-to-day basis at a systematic level for UC, for the University of California, right? So
right. Who knew I'd oversee all the financial aid one day, right?
That's wonderful. It's a great story. So so with education continue to evolve very fast, how do you really go about driving systematic change that have sustainable impact? You talked about different stories that you experienced as a student. That certainly still many of that is still reflected on campus today. What do you but also many campuses across the UC system, right? So what do you feel are the ways that that you have experienced and you have been able to done successfully to drive that systematic change?
Yeah. So I will say, transformation is opportunistic. That systems move slowly. It takes a long time to move people, processes, procedures, policies. So but transformation can be really fast if you find the right opportunity. So one of the things I'm really proud of is the development of the gender recognition and lived name policy for the university. And why I'm proud of that is that information systems can breed exclusion. And what we had at the university was information systems that did not allow people to use what we call their lived name or their preferred name. And what it meant was that people were being outed in our systems, and they were being excluded because the names that they did not use were being used for rosters and badges and ID cards. And so we were having a lot of difficulty getting people to understand how the systems that we were creating that were new were actually perpetuating this exclusion. And so we said, well, what can we do? Who can help us make changes? And so we invited our students to share their experiences at the Board of Regents. And that prompted the regents immediately to tell us to take action. And in order to, we're a university, we're a bureaucracy. So the very first thing we had to do was create a presidential policy. And then we had to implement that policy. And I'm really proud today that almost every information system at the University of California now allows people to use their lived name, and that people understand that the legal name, if that name still exists and it's different, is really only necessary in a very, very small handful of cases. There was a large belief that there was so many places and ways you had to use your legal name, and it wasn't the case. So I think that you can make transformation when you've given the opportunity, but it's really important to identify and take advantage of the opportunities. So our gender recognition and lived name policy has become a model for other institutions across the country, and our information systems allow people to be who they are. And I think that's really important.
That's wonderful. That's a great example in terms of looking at opportunity to transform, to do systematic transformation that's really impactful for across the UC system, right? So, just within that kind of round of thought, what strategy have you found effective in engaging with community, right? Both within and beyond the UC system, because that's what you have described in terms of your example is really how do you bring out the students to put a face next to the story, right? And that's really important when you're trying to bring changes. And what are the other mechanisms you have been able to do successfully to drive that?
Yeah. So this is going to sound like a bit of a cliche, so please forgive me, those of you who are listening, but you have to meet people where they are, and you have to build from what they know. And, I think often in the university, we feel as if we just tell people who we are, they'll believe us. And the truth is that doesn't work. And that's often the case with new leaders, right? They come in and the leaders want to solve problems, and they'll say, well, we don't have enough African-American students, so we need to tell them, more about us. And we have to counter that with the challenge is what they know about us, that they aren't empty vessels to be filled with new knowledge. And so when we work with community organizations, that's where we start. And that is often really hard and painful work, because the very first thing you want to do, because, this is your institution, this is your alma mater, this is where you grew up and became a person, is you want to defend the institution. But you really have to start with what communities know and build from there. And, if I can use an example from Merced. They run a program for parents, and they were having difficulty getting parents to understand higher education in California, because a lot of their parents come from other countries, and they realized that they couldn't start by explaining the three systems of public higher education in California. They had to start with how education works in the countries where the families came from, because that was the building block, that was the foundational knowledge, and they had to show how California universities worked either the same or differently from that. And that really helped those families understand how then to access education. So I think sometimes we want to go into communities and do good work, but we're thinking we're filling an empty vessel and not starting with what a community fundamentally knows about us. And sometimes it's not what we like, but we've got to live with it, and we've got to grow from that, and we've got to grow that way together.
That's great, because that really aligns in terms of your leadership vision for change, right? And then how we can engage community by meeting them where they are. And so we want to kind of ask you a couple questions about what do you see in terms of the future focused education, right? As a leader responsible for diversity and equity across the UC system, what are some of the biggest areas where you feel real change is needed, right? Things that we still are striving to be better at, things that we can work together, bring alumni community together to help serve the communities that we try to create.
Yeah, I want to go back to belonging, partly because it's what we share, and I suspect many people who are listening and watching today share. So, I like to describe the work that I do as being responsible preschool to the professoriate for student success. And at the end of the day, it's that student journey that's at the root of of transformation. And what we all want and what we all need is for all of our students to be able to study, to conduct research, to learn, and to work in campus environments where they feel safe, they feel included, and they have a strong sense of belonging. And as much as we are a great university, we aren't achieving that vision in the way that we should, and that I think we aspire to. And so I think that belonging needs a lot of attention, a great deal of attention. Other parts of DEI/BJ are important, right? But when students belong, they're going to pass that message along that these are universities that are great places to be. And when younger students hear that Cal is a great place to be, then they strive to be here. And that in turn improves our diversity. And as our diversity improves, it forces a reckoning with equity. And we are seeing that our campuses are working hard to close those kinds of institutional gaps in terms of who is served and how they are served because of who is here. And so belonging is an area where we have to be a lot more progressive, and we have to break down biases, silos, and stereotypical beliefs. One data point across the system that remains pervasive is that African American students consistently report a lack of belonging. They are a population that consistently reports a lack of belonging. And so a lot of our work is to link leaders across the system to identify and address bias, bigotry, and discrimination. And again, to go back to asset building and not deficit filling, too often people equate diversity, equity, and inclusion with the need to address deficits. So if we have more students who are first generation students, we're going to need more tutoring services to address their deficits. But if you think about it, as UC has become more diverse, it has only become more excellent. Our campuses are all in the top. All of our campuses in another state would be the flagship institution. We have Berkeley and LA jockeying for first place in public universities, forever. We have become more diverse and we have become more excellent. So we have to reframe our vision and our approaches to belonging by focusing on what people bring, the assets they bring, rather than grounding ourselves so heavily in their deficits. And I think that can help us be better, I think, at fostering the kind of belonging that we think that we really want to see. And a lot of this, and the place where I think alumni are really powerful, is that early engagement with UC pays off. It pays off in retention and yield because people who engage early and often with the university understand sooner the hidden curriculum of higher education. They're connected with people who can shape and guide them sooner, and they're able to make the university their own. And that's why programs like Summer Bridge, programs like Early Outreach, these are opportunities for alumni to give back, to have an impact on those who are coming forward, because they can help break the mystique and they can model what it means to be here and to be successful. And they can introduce students to careers they may never have heard of and help them begin planning pathways to those careers. So I really think early and frequent engagement with UC pays off in recruitment and retention and yield. And I think alumni can play a huge role in that.
Thank you. That's great to hear. And that's another initiative that we can really focus on to really bridge the gap between campus and alumni community. So I want to ask you a couple other questions, and then we want to, toward the end, have 5-minute Q&A session. So feel free to drop your question, audience, in the chat box throughout the event. We will be taking your questions too at the end. So a couple questions to wrap up this fireside chat. looking ahead, what do you envision UC Berkeley and the entire UC system staying ahead in preparing students for a more sustainable and equitable future, right? You have mentioned about several of the programs initiative that your office and your system is running. We want to hear more in terms of, as we get into a more diverse campus, right? How do we really concretely, create that belonging? And we talked about in our prep talk, the Hispanic, serving institution, the serving part of, the conversation. Love to have you elaborate more on that as well.
Sure. So, as education rapidly evolves, in fact, today I'm talking about AI and teaching and learning. I don't even use autocorrect. So this is so far ahead of where I am. But when it comes to EDI, or equity, diversity, and inclusion, it's important to recognize that these are fundamental American values that are being perversely weaponized as somehow antithetical to American values. And I like to remind people that the reason that UC benefited from the land that was stolen from indigenous people is that we agreed to educate the people of California. And as those people have become increasingly diverse, now is not the time to turn our backs on that fundamental promise. 55% of K-12 students in California identify as Chicanx Latinx. We must be ready to receive them. We have to be ready to educate them. And to do so means we have to transform our institution so that it meets students' needs, rather than maintaining a status quo university where students are expected to meet the institution's needs. So I want to I'll get off my soapbox there, but I think that EDI in practice has to be core to how leaders think about their leadership practice, how you as emerging leaders, future leaders, develop their toolkit. And I like to say, when they made me the chief diversity officer, I didn't want to be the chief diversity officer. And I told them, I said, everybody needs to be the chief diversity officer of whatever it is they lead. You don't get to outsource this. And to be clear, it isn't, I don't mean that you have to personally identify as an underrepresented person or as from a vulnerable community, but you have to think about who you serve, right? Whether that's students, whether that's clients, whether that's customers. So leaders, as early on as they can in their career, need to be able to recognize and address bias, discrimination, exclusion. They need to be able to cultivate environments where people feel safe, welcome, and included. And they need to be able to look at decisions for the way that they might have a disparate impact on marginalized groups. And all of those skills have to be part of the leader's toolkit. So whether or not DEI is weaponized and politicized, the fact remains that diversity is a fact of life. We have inequitable structures built into our schools and our workplaces, and we have customers and clients who represent all kinds of communities and backgrounds. And I think the future of leadership really is cultivating early on, through your experiences as an undergraduate or graduate student in the workplace, really having that DEI toolkit as part of your leadership practice. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, Cathy, but I think a lot about what people tell me when they say, well, I don't know anything about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm like, how do you live here and you don't know anything about it? So I won't let people get away with pretending ignorance. We all live and work and enjoy life in these settings, and we must, as leaders, build that muscle.
Thank you. That's true and very inspirational. I want to end the chat and then open up to the Q&A section of our fireside chat with this question, which you mentioned several times about how alum can be part of this engagement process and in creating an early experience where there's a sense of belonging. Are there other initiative or specific initiative you feel Berkeley alum can be particularly successful in helping both the Berkeley campus, but also beyond, right? That both the UC system, but also just even in their communities, wherever they are professionally or, where they live.
Yeah. So I think a lot about, can we start with the end in mind, right? And one of the ends that I think is important is cultivating the diverse Cal alum of the future. And by that, I mean, when you consider that the future Cal alum is more likely to come from a first generation family, a low income family, a rural community, et cetera, then how do we help them earlier understand and get excited about being an alum and continuing to give back? So I think it would be great if Berkeley alum, wherever they are, help create opportunities in their organizations for these students to take those next steps, to create internships, create cooperative learning, so that they can connect the experiences of their undergraduate careers more closely to their future professional lives, that they can engage with alumni early and often, not just on campus, but in what could be future workplaces. And I'd love to see more alumni as part of the work we do in preparing students for higher education and for the university in particular, volunteering to serve on career panels and virtually if you're in New York, because Cathy, you know, I have you come into a career panel, providing mentoring, helping students envision themselves where you are now. And you can do that no matter where you live in the world. We can connect you with students and community-based organizations, and you can in turn connect them to opportunity and help them think about careers that they may never have heard of. And the only thing we ask is that you approach that with an asset framework that we are building, and not a deficit one that we are filling. But I think there are unparalleled opportunities for alumni to share. And I really think that as, you know, the world of work evolves, and as, you know, the young people today are going to be in careers we can't even imagine now. And when you're a first generation college student, you're also a first generation corporate person. You're first generation your whole career. And the opportunity to connect with alumni early and help guide them, I think is invaluable. So we have plenty of opportunities. You can do these things anywhere in the world. COVID opened up, you know, a whole range of hybridity and modalities for folks. And we'd love to see more of you with our young people.
Thank you, Yvette. That's wonderful. So many different ways where we can get involved and make an impact, right? And really put ourselves back into, you know, how we felt when we were on campus, and how could we help to build a better, you know, experience and belonging for the students who experience that, you know, who are going on campus right now. So I want to open up to the Q&A section from the audience. I think this question is very interesting because we've heard a lot of, you know, kind of DIBJ, you know, alumni community that belongs to certain, you know, minorities or representation, right? So this question is, you know, asking us, where do Caucasian male alum fit into the DIBJ alumni world, right? And listening tonight, the audience doesn't feel that he belong, right? So I think that's an important way for us, you know, important question for us to address. How, you know, how can we make this account for all environment, right? So would you like to take that question?
Sure. And, you know, one of the things I say a lot is diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, is a set of American values, and it includes everyone. Diversity is just a fact. Cathy and I share something in common. We have found a bridge between decades and across the nation to find something that we share. And I think we can all do that. And again, I like to think about who we serve, and to the extent that white men, white women, Jewish men, Jewish women are part of that, that's who we serve. And so when I think about belonging, I think about finding those things we have in common and working toward the greater common good. I think it's because people think diversity means color, they think it automatically excludes them. But diversity is all of us. And that's why the weaponization of DEI has been so problematic, because it's allowed people or enabled people to think that diversity doesn't include them. It is just a fact. It is just a fact. The new chancellor is a first generation college student. He and I share that in common. We don't play the guitar together, so we don't share that in common. But, you know, we all bring something unique and distinct to our work and to our perspectives. And I think it's really important to again, not be deficit, I don't belong, but to say, ask yourself, why not? Because I think the truth is you would find that you really do. Many people in this space are not just people of color. And what we're always aiming at is, who are we serving? How can we contribute to the future, which is a diverse future? So I would encourage you, if you don't feel like you belong, to reach out. I will find something in common and put you in touch, and you will feel belonging all over the place, because we need all of us in this work.
Okay, wonderful. That's great. Yeah. And we have another question, really related to kind of the student protests, the university administrators' response to that. Could you speak, from your current leadership role at the UC system level, and but also, just close by campus, from kind of UC Berkeley's perspective, where do you see kind of your experience and perspective on the 80s to now, the changes and the good and bad? Can you speak to that?
Sure. I in the 80s, the apartheid movement was against the system. It was against the man, right? I mean, and so we could find solidarity in fighting the system. What I think is different about this particular moment and this crisis, and it is a crisis, is that we are in conflict with ourselves. And as a university, I think it is that we have got to think about what is at the root of this. And what is at the root of this is that we haven't paid attention to vulnerable, marginalized communities. And, that isn't to say that, every community is always vulnerable and marginalized, but right now we have communities that are vulnerable and marginalized, and we need to find space for healing and reconciliation. And so it has not been the case that we've had our students against each other. We've had the students against the system, right? The students against the man, the students against the apparatus. But this feels really different, and it feels really painful. So I will say, the campuses all need to take a step back and reflect to make sure that they actually have the approaches to campus climate, the ability for us to have civic discussion, for us to cultivate that disagreements are okay. We can disagree and still work together, but we can't do that in a way that denies anyone's humanity. That's not what we need to do. But I think at the root of this is that vulnerable, marginalized communities felt excluded and that they didn't belong, and they didn't have support at the university. And I won't opine on who those communities were, but just to know that I think is what we call campus climate. We want a healthy campus climate. We don't need a positive one, right? It doesn't have to be kumbaya or any of those things, but we need a healthy campus climate where people feel safe, expressing their opinions, expressing their disagreements, having those conversations, where they feel like there are spaces where they belong and that they feel included in the kinds of in the life of the university. And that didn't happen, and it was a really different moment. So if I had to summarize, I'd say it was a difference between the students against the system and the students against one another.
Yeah. And it's definitely, your answer really speak to kind of how can we create a healthy climate for all of us to be able to express different views, to feel a sense of belonging, even when the topics and issue and our perspective could differ, right? And that speak to also the other question that you just answered. So I want to
treat one another with respect and civility, because we all deserve that.
Yeah, humanity, and find the common ground where we can relate to each other, right? And so there's one more question which will help us end on a very positive note. So the audience really thank you for a great, amazing conversation. She's really inspired to be in the DI field later in life. She has an MPA and SWDO degree, specializing in health, public administration. She wants to hear your advice on how she can, look for opportunity in the future to do it professionally beyond,
Well, what I say is DEI has to be in the water, right? It should be part and parcel of everything that we do, because it's just a fact. So if you're in social work, is that what it is? MSW, I think is what it said. Yeah, so I think if you're in that work, then look for opportunities to work in spaces that have health disparities, projects that are working in vulnerable communities or vulnerable regions, where you can lend your expertise. And if I'd love to talk to you offline. Feel free. I work for the university. My information's public. Feel free to give me a call and let's brainstorm, because we need everybody doing this work. But again, I like to say it shouldn't be something that is, it shouldn't be a specialty. I don't want it to be. I want to work myself out of this job. It shouldn't be a specialty. It should be what we all do. And so as you advance in your career, look for opportunities to create space for these kinds of conversations, to elevate and lift community disparities in your work. Those kinds of things can be really helpful. And as an alum, get involved in some of the projects at the university, because that can give you a lot of experience as well.
Thank you, Yvette. We want to conclude this segment of the program by thanking you for really inspiring us with many of your great stories and leadership journey, and many of the great ideas and initiatives that you have been leading through both your time at Berkeley, but also through the UC system. Are there final thoughts you want to, final words of wisdom you want to share with us, especially for this homecoming weekend, in terms of what we can do to really bring each other together?
Yeah. So I would just say, go Bears. I hope they win. But I again think, when we think about diversity, when we think about inclusion, we're talking about everyone. But there are groups that have different experiences, and I think it's important for us to recognize those experiences as being different than ours, but having value. And so I don't want white people to feel excluded in this work, and partly because I know thousands of them who don't. And so those that do, I really want to help you understand you're included. You're included. Our rural students are frequently white students who have a very, very different kind of experience, and we're all part of the water. So find a way to contribute, find a way to get involved, see yourself as part of this community, because you are, and don't look for ways to pull yourself out, but find ways to pull yourself in.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yvette. We're very fortunate to learn from your experience and passion. Very grateful for your time to join us virtually during the homecoming weekend. Thank you for enlightening us today with many great ideas and best practices to lead forward. So let's give Yvette a round of applause to thank her for her time and wisdom.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Yvette. So now I'm excited to turn the conversation over to our distinguished panel of alumni change makers. Moderating the discussion will be Dr. Amber Johnson, a leader in their own right, who will guide us through the conversations. Dr. Amber Johnson is the Assistant Vice Chancellor and Chief of Staff in the Division of Equity and Inclusion at the University of California, Berkeley. As a scholar, artist, and activist, Dr. Johnson's research and activism focus on narratives of identity, protest, healing, and social justice in digital media, popular media, and everyday lived experience. As a polymath, their mixed media artistry involve working with metals, recycle and reclaimed goods, photography, poetry, percussion, and paint to interrogate systems of oppression and create capacity for different critical futures. Prior to joining the administrative team at UC Berkeley, Dr. Johnson served as an award-winning professor of communication and social justice, and as executive director and co-founder of the Institute for Healing Justice and Equity at St. Louis University. Dr. Johnson specialized in community engagement, humanizing equity, and exploring the relationship between healing justice and equity. Dr. Johnson is also the founding director of the Justice Fleet, a mobile social justice museum that fosters healing through art, dialogue, pleasure, and play. Dr. Johnson created the Justice Fleet to experiment with methodologies that reimagine community engagement, healing justice, humanized equity, and critical future. Let's welcome Dr. Johnson, who will introduce our distinguished alumni speakers and start the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cathy. It is an absolute pleasure to be here and to talk about the future and advancing sustainable and equitable futures for all. If any of you have received an email from me, you know that I signed my signature with In Futurity. So I am so excited to talk about how we create sustainable and equitable futures and to introduce our three panelists who are making sure we have a Earth to call home in that future. So first, I would like to talk about Kate Gordon. Kate Gordon is the CEO of California Forward, a statewide organization dedicated to a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive economy across every region of the state. Gordon has spent the past 2 decades working at the intersection of climate change, energy policy, and equitable economic development. Most recently, she served within the Biden-Harris administration as senior advisor to U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm. During her time at the Department of Energy, Gordon led a variety of locally focused initiatives to help drive a more sustainable and resilient energy transition, including creating community benefits plan framework for the Department of Education funded under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. Prior to her time with the Biden-Harris administration, Gordon served for several years in California state government as the director of the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and senior climate policy advisor to Governor Gavin Newsom, where her policy work earned her California Forward's 2022 California Steward Leader Award. And as an alum, Gordon earned a JD and a master's in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley. So welcome, Kate. Next up, we have Wayne Ho. Wayne Ho is the president and CEO of the Chinese American Planning Council, known as CPC, the nation's largest Asian American social services agency, with a mission to promote the social and economic empowerment of Chinese American immigrant and low-income communities. CPC serves over 80,000 community members in the areas of education, family support, and community and economic empowerment at 35 locations throughout New York City. Recently, CPC opened CPC 1, a mixed-use development that includes a community center for 15,000 clients and affordable housing for 210 residents. Wayne received his Bachelor of Arts from UC Berkeley and his Master's in Public Policy from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Welcome, Wayne. And last, we have Dr. Renee. Dr. Renee Whitmire is the Vice President, Program Strategy and Pivotal Ventures at Pivotal Ventures, the investment and incubation company founded by Melinda Gates. In her role, Renee leads Pivotal Program Strategy Team and is accountable for Pivotal's philanthropic work focused on accelerating women's power and influence and supporting the well-being of people in the U.S. She previously worked at Intel in numerous positions and works as a researcher in Microsoft Research Labs and has done extensive fieldwork in East Africa. And her degree is from a Ph.D. in Development Studies and Technology from the Energy and Resources Group. Welcome, Renee. Thank you all so much for being here. So just to start, can you share with us some of your leadership journey and how your experiences at UC Berkeley shaped the path you took? Dr. Renee, would you like to start?
Sure, and thank you so much for having me. I would say my experience at UC Berkeley really shaped my leadership, particularly because at Berkeley, I trained to be a social scientist. And so during that time, I spent a lot of time doing field work, listening to the voices of people closest to the problems that I was trying to address. And so I was really looking at economic development, poverty, and a lot of marginalized groups, and looking at the intersection of gender across a lot of the issues in that space. All of those experiences really are at the core at how I approach everything. So not just my career, but my relationships, how I think about philanthropy, because I center the voices of the people that I'm trying to serve in the solutions that my team and I develop and think about. So that and as you mentioned, I work for Melinda French Gates. I lead her philanthropy at Pivotal Ventures, and our mission is to advance social progress. And in order to do that, we're looking at how do you address women's power and influence in the US and globally. And in order to do that, we really need to bring people to the table to do that with us, because we have such a privilege to do this work and to deploy capital towards different problems and solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you for your work, Renee. Kate.
Thanks so much for the question. I came to UC Berkeley after taking about 5 years off after college, and I worked as a tenant organizer and a homeless advocate in San Francisco, and went to Berkeley to become a tenant lawyer. So one of the funny things about life, right, is that it takes a lot of turns. I ended up doing getting into the joint degree after getting into law school, getting into the joint degree program with city planning because I realized I was interested in the systems that were leading to people getting evicted or having the issues they were having as tenants and wanting to really work at a systems level. And I think Berkeley was particularly good for that. Very interdisciplinary as a graduate experience. I felt like I was able to meet and engage with people from all over the university. I will say the law school can be a little bit of a silo, so I was really glad that I was able to get out into the graduate community. And experience those different kind of viewpoints and really think about kind of the way cities are and spaces are designed and how that excludes or focuses on belonging for people. I also think Berkeley, I was really struck by the diversity, the economic diversity of Berkeley when I was there, really struck by the number of students coming from, first generation college, coming from parts of the country where or families where sort of elite education was not kind of the primary focus of everybody all the time. And I think that is incredibly helpful in terms of going out in the world because Berkeley is so many different things to so many different people. It's a really kind of different experience depending on where you're coming from. And that got me very focused on really thinking about kind of place-based investments and policies and really meeting people where they are. Which is something I've done my whole career to date from that organizing background through my time at Berkeley and into the work. So very definitely has shaped my work. I also do policy for a living, and really both the law and city planning are fundamental, honestly. Law, because it can help you, I can read things really fast and adjust them very quickly and understand the structures. But planning, because you get a sense of then how those structures actually affect people on the ground. So really appreciate the having those two sides.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kate. Wayne.
Thank you for the question and thank you for the invitation to join this distinguished panel. So I was an undergrad at UC Berkeley from 1993 to 1997. And that was the time when the regions passed SP1 and SP2 to eliminate affirmative action, and then Proposition 209 eliminated affirmative action. So I got really involved in all the protest movements about making sure that we keep all UCs as well as all colleges and universities maintain its diversity. And as an Asian American, as a Chinese American, it becomes important to make sure that we give everyone the same opportunities and the importance of a diverse student body. So Berkeley shaped my career because when I was there, it was not just us working in different student groups and working with Chicano Latino communities and the Black community, Native American communities, the Filipino community, in order to promote diversity, where we were working together, going out to high schools and middle schools and trying to encourage students of color and recently arrived immigrants and low-income communities to come to Cal. We were also trying to deal with it at the policy level. And the last thing that happened on our way out was passing Proposition 3, where $3 of student fees were added so that it could fund student-led recruitment programs. And I think that shaped where I am now, where in New York City, I've been the executive director of 3 different nonprofits, and each of these nonprofits do both services on the ground, human services for diverse communities, mostly Asian Americans, while at the same time trying to affect policy change, because we need to make sure the systems and the structures and the policies that hold people back or communities back from opportunity are changed so that everybody else does have opportunities. And I didn't go out to always work in the Asian American community, but I feel like that's where my role has been, is bringing together the diverse AAPI ethnic communities, recognizing the most marginalized amongst our communities, while at the same time working with other communities of color, LGBTQ communities, disability advocates, and others to make sure that everyone does have an opportunity, not just to survive, but thrive here in New York City.
Beautiful, wonderful. So all 3 of you have really kind of What's the word on the street? You're not new to this. You're true to this. You've been doing this work for a really long time. So how do you personally balance sustainability and equity considerations in your leadership roles? Are they even separable? But how do you focus on both at the same time? So I'll start with you, Kate.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I sort of don't think they're separatable. I mean, I think a lot of the work that I've done in the climate and energy space really comes from sort of an economic development and kind of impact on place kind of perspective. And that led me pretty early into thinking a lot about climate impact. So there's a whole set of people thinking about reducing carbon emissions, right? And how do you do that at the source? And how do we bring down emissions and slow down climate change? But back in 2014, I worked with a number of folks, Mike Bloomberg, Hank Paulson, some others, to co-lead a project to really look at climate impacts on places at the very place-based level. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because it's a great resilience to climate impacts, which are just baked into the system. I mean, we have impacts today from the last 40 to 70 years of industrial activity. Those are disproportionately felt in low-income communities and communities of color. They're disproportionately felt in communities that have a really very little economic mobility in general. So by those who are least able to escape them or to adapt to them. And so I think that's just a fundamental thing about thinking about sustainability, really at a global level and in the policy work I've done, but also at a very personal level. The ability to become more resilient, I think, is something to me that is a really kind of part and parcel of a conversation about equity, because individuals in the United States in particular, we have very little safety net. We have very little support for people in this country. And so how do you start building in systems that provide for resilience? Like, I've done a lot of that through policy, through attaching policy to dollars going out the door from the federal and state level, building in living wage, building in access and career pathways, building in kind of targeted support to specific communities and capacity building. But I think you have to be very intentional about it, because I think one thing we just don't talk about that much in the US is just how little we provide to people in terms of basic safety net, basic access to housing, healthcare, health, et cetera. So I think it's really part and parcel of the same conversation.
Thank you. Wayne.
Yeah, I agree with what Kate said. You can't separate this concept of equity and sustainability. So for us in the human services nonprofit space, that means that we need to really center the individuals, the families, multi-generational families of all diverse backgrounds, to make sure that they are not just making ends meet, but they do have economic opportunity. And so when we're talking about opportunity, that means that we need to make sure that everybody has access to quality daycare, for example. But then, as an example, the federal government, when they do childcare vouchers, undocumented families are not eligible for childcare vouchers. So that's why we need to make sure, and we did successfully advocate for the city of New York to use its own tax levy dollars to fund vouchers for undocumented children. So it's important to always keep in mind in New York City that 70% of all New York City residents are people of color, and even more are foreign born. So what that means then is, for human services, we know that less than 10% of all social services contract dollars from the city of New York, which there's $4 billion that goes out from the city of New York to nonprofits to serve the community. Less than 10% of the $4 billion per year goes to organizations run by either people of color or women or immigrants. So that's why we've all banded together over the last 10 plus years to make sure that funding becomes equitable to our community. We need to make sure that boards of nonprofits, as well as executive directors, reflect the community. We need to make sure that we're not just employing community members themselves, but because government contracts determine wages, that government contracts are paying living wages and providing good benefits for our own nonprofit human services workers. And then it's not just important for us to address conditions in our own communities and neighborhoods. We as nonprofit leaders need to take a mirror to ourselves and make sure that our policies are more equitable. So what can we do to better serve women if they're going on parental leave, or what can we do better to serve the disabled, or what else can we do ourselves to serve individuals who don't speak English but are part of our workforce. So not only do we have to look at hold a magnifying glass to systems and to neighborhoods and to the city of New York, we also have to hold a mirror to ourselves as nonprofit leaders.
Absolutely. So Dr. Renee, I'll throw the question to you as well, but also really just think about Wayne's answer focusing so much on things that have to do with womanhood, right? And what it means to be a woman in these spaces. And so much of your work focuses on women. And so how do you balance that as someone who is femme presenting in these roles, but also thinking through the sustainability part?
Yeah, well, Wayne and Kate, I'd love to keep talking because all of the things that you're saying are very, very much resonating with me, and also just taking like a systems-wide look at some of these really big, seemingly intractable challenges. I think is just such a unique perspective, and one that I think being at Berkeley really helped me have that lens on the world. But I do, yes, Wayne, I was going to pick up on things that you spoke about, because for me, we are looking at, gender at large and women and the challenges that women face and the barriers that they face in terms of their own power and influence. So things like caregiving challenges, which impact women disproportionately, both childcare and caring for older adults. Access to paid leave, structural barriers and bias in the workplace, challenges to retention and progression of women to get to that next level, and why some of these broader structural issues around caregiving intersect with that and becoming a huge barrier to advancing in the workplace. And so we really think about that with solutions both on the policy side, but also how do we we're working in a system that is basically set up for the 1950s in terms of caregiving. And how do we innovate on that system? How do we use market innovations as well as policy tools to really disrupt some of these things that we just all kind of see as what is quote unquote normal, but is very challenging for both women and men. And I think paid leave, we see that as something that can help everyone, all Americans, really support their families. And COVID is something that basically brought all of this to light and to the national conversation, which has been great, seeing the momentum that's building around it.
So I just want our audience to sit with that statement for a second. We are operating in policies and practices that are appropriate for the 1950s. Dr. Renee. So this is for any of you, whoever wants to take it. How do you see education evolving to better prepare our students for leadership in these areas and to specifically get us out of the 1950s? What is education's role? Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah, I want to pick up on the 1950s point because I think it's interesting in another way too, which is we have all these systems built for the 1950s, but that was a time when we had a much more diversified economy where we paid people without a 4-year degree a living or a family supporting wage. We don't do that anymore. Our economy has hollowed out a huge number of supply chain and manufacturing jobs. Another thing COVID underscored, frankly, is that when COVID hit us and we realized the downside of not having any supply chains. And so the downside of an economy where we were like, it's okay if 5 people make a lot of money, no one else makes any money, but everything's cheap. Like that's kind of where we've gotten. So I think the other thing about the 50s was that, not that it was perfect, but it's certainly there was income inequality was much tighter, and we had a far bigger range of jobs for a variety of people. And I think that is goes to an education point, which is, I do think we need to get back to a place where we are not leaning on elite education as the answer to all questions, right? There is a real opportunity to think about alternative kinds of education, career tech education, different models of doing pathways through community college and other college pathways, different models, frankly, in the tenure process. The tenure process is designed to not only not reward, but to disincentivize collaboration and practice. And if we continue to do that, we're going to continue to have this system, again, designed for the 1950s, where you have these professors that have no practice experience or have been told not to have practice experience, have not collaborated, and are being put in a position where they're supposedly managing people and teaching students, right? To me, it's a really challenging situation. I think a lot of professors, including those on this call, you in particular, Dr. Johnson, have overcome that. Like, there's people who have overcome that, but it's extremely challenging to be in the elite tenure process and overcome that. So I think when we think about education, we need to think not just about the students, but like, what are we teaching? What are we saying when we have that system that was set up the way that it is about engagement with people and engagement with places?
Which takes me to another great question, because like y'all are just giving me life today. Oh, thank you. And thank you for your compliment. So what does true engagement with community look like? How do we engage communities when we're building these sustainable and equitable futures as leaders if we're so, and I use we lightly, if so many of us are disengaged and not connected, right? I think a lot of professors forget that they are a part of communities. They're like, I need to go into the community. Sweetie, you are community. What communities are you from, right? Like, don't forget that. So what does true community engagement look like from your lenses?
So I can jump in on this one. So again, like I have the privilege of being a grant maker and in the space of philanthropy. And, you know, one of as I mentioned, we have a whole strategy around accelerating women's power and influence. And we take an intersectional perspective on that. So we think very intentionally about women of color. But we also wanted not only to have that as a lens that cut across all of our work, but a dedicated strategy focused on that. Because if you don't, then that sometimes falls off the table in the conversation around gender. And so we were very intentional on that. In 2019, Melinda French Gates committed $1 billion to this agenda. And as we thought about building that strategy, our team took a different approach and said, we want to build this strategy with a design council of women of color leaders who are closest to the problem, who are the people with lived experience and understand the communities that we are trying to engage and solve for. And what if we could invert the power dynamic, which is often there in philanthropy, of here we have all the solutions, here's the money, and bring the people in together to co-create that. And it really led to a unique and innovative strategy that kind of just turns the assumptions around what philanthropy should do into a different kind of perspective.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that framing and that approach, right? That is the epitome of humanizing equity, putting the humans first in this process. Wayne, I saw you pop off mute. Please answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I like talking in sound bites, so just 2 sound bites on this. Disability advocates were the ones that first said nothing about us without us. And that's something that we've tried to do at the Chinese American Planning Council, where think about equity. With a staff of 700, it can't be myself and my C-suite who are the ones trying to come up with the ideas on how do we best provide services, or what are some policy ideas to address everything from affordable housing to lack of cultural and linguistic accessible services to how do we deal with deportations because of the NYPD partnering with ICE. So that's where we made sure to really bring to the table our staff members, including our frontline staff. So that's everybody from our daycare teachers to our custodians to the security guards at our affordable housing buildings and our community centers to the community members themselves. And that's everybody from parents or grandparents of our daycare kids to individuals who come to our senior centers, where we have an opportunity to ask them about what's important and what priorities they see, what are some concerns they see in their neighborhoods, but what are their ideas to make things better. Something we learned from these conversations then is that there are times where certain ideas which might be more charged or could promote separation between communities, because as you know, during COVID, there was a rise in anti-Asian hate. And too many times in the media kept showing a Black or brown person attacking an Asian senior, where just quick note, there's actually been research done that over 70% of the perpetrators of violence against Asians are actually white, but that national news actually had 70% of the perpetrators being people of color when put on the news. So we got to figure out what's going on, what's the narrative is there. But this is all to say that it gave us a chance to do more community education and honest dialogue with our communities about, are the solutions really over policing, or are the solutions really dealing with homelessness and mental health and affordable housing and wraparound services that all communities deserve, regardless of economic mobility? And then just another quick soundbite to end this, it goes back to what Renee said, which is that Glenn Martin, the criminal justice advocate, has said that those closest to the problem are closest to the solutions, but they're furthest from power. And I think that's why it's important for us, when we are the elites and we have the power, or we have the decision making, that we really need to bring folks to the table to help so that they have a space and opportunity to put solutions on the table.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it's the circle of impact. Those closest to the impact should be the loudest voices when it comes to the solution, right? But that's, again, the pyramid has been inverted. So I want to shift us to talk about visions for the future, right? Let's take this to a really positive, hopeful note, because nihilism is like the greatest threat to this work beyond like white supremacy. So what is your vision for creating a more equitable future in your fields? Like, what do you see coming? What are you excited about? Oh, I love it. You're like, stuck to
I can tell
everything.
you what I'm excited about. So we have been, in the past, we've focused on things around that women's power and influence, around issues around caregiving, getting women into positions of power, like in finance and investment and tech, and all of these kind of other things like caregiving and paid leave. But one of the things that we have not done in the past is really specifically acknowledge that to have power and influence, you also have to have well-being. And your health, your well-being is so critically important. And so I'm super excited because we have dipped our toe into that space. In the last week, we announced a $250 million open call for around women's health, which is an underfunded, just has received very little attention in the past. And so we're really trying to shine a light and do more in that space. So I'm super excited about that.
I love that. Healing justice, right? We hurt people hurt people. How do we stop the cycle of violence? We got to heal, y'all. We still haven't grieved the over 1 million people who died of COVID-19 or complications related, right? So where do we prioritize that healing, that grief, that growth? Anybody else? What are you excited about, Kate Wayne?
I mean, I'm excited. It's excited is a strange word in a way, because I think that's when you work on climate issues, it's hard to not feel a little overwhelmed. But I do think we're in the middle, and it is largely because of actually COVID. I think these shocks to the system create moments of opportunity. And COVID was one. Frankly, the Russia-Ukraine war, when it comes to energy, is one. The increasing climate shocks in general is creating a moment where we're actually taking a really hard look at the economy that we've built over the last 40 years and saying, is it really true that the world is flat and that we should just be chasing lowest prices, right? And maybe we should be thinking more locally. Like maybe we should be thinking about local systems and communities. And why that's exciting, both because I just think it's the right, like, I think we need to get back to that. It has been profoundly inequitable within the United States, what we've been doing, but also, there's so few spaces anymore where people do meet each other. Like it used to be that the draft, right? The military was one of those spaces, and then we got rid of the draft. And then it used to be public school was one of those spaces, and people are leaving public school in droves, which is very stressful to me, actually. And then it used to be like sporting events, right? I mean, with the A's leaving Oakland, was the loss of one of the last really affordable ballparks where people could just go and be with other people. And I feel like, let's try to get back. I feel like there's a shift happening where we're getting back to something that is more, to your point, Dr. Johnson, just is more about, we are part of the community. Like, academia is part of the community. Businesses are part of the community. Like, everyone is part of the community. So how do we rebuild that sense of community that I do think is really necessary, but also just, it feels like maybe we're moving in that direction.
Absolutely. Wayne.
Yeah, I mean, just to the idea of curious things to be excited about. As hard as things were from 2017 to 2020, 2021, with a presidential administration that was purposely marginalizing every community of people of every background, what I do think happened was that the nonprofit community, community-based organizations did start to think about change differently. So that meant that a lot of neighborhood organizations tapping more into city and county organizations, and neighborhood organizations working better with state allies and umbrella organizations. That also meant more national movements getting together. That also included whether it's human services working more closely with environmental justice organizations working more closely with immigrant rights organizations working more closely with women's rights organizations, that it wasn't just us seeing each other at benefits and galas, but it was organizationally, we're trying to create partnerships because we knew everybody was getting attacked. And I think we're starting to get savvier now, where it's not just labor unions or corporations who are endorsing candidates or donating to candidates or holding fundraisers of candidates, that now in the nonprofit world, we're seeing more 501c4s, we're seeing more PACs, we're seeing more entities get together in order to figure out how we as nonprofit organizations, whether we're doing services, whether we're doing policy and advocacy, whether we're doing community organizing, that we do understand what's happening on the ground, and that we can, within the law, work together to make sure that the right people who are elected to public office or who are once in office are held accountable to the priorities and the concerns that we have.
Absolutely. That accountability piece is critical. It's so critical. So we have 4 minutes left, and I want us to end with some advice for our audience. So in like 30 to 45 seconds, you have 2 options. 1, what advice would you give your freshman self embarking on this journey, like today? Or what would your 90-year-old self say to you about the future? Dr. Renee, you go first.
My quick answer, and this is to my freshman self, is to be curious and embrace curiosity, ask questions, and I think that learning posture will serve you well. And when people ask you questions, don't get defensive. It's all about just understanding and mutual understanding.
I love that. I always say curiosity is a salve that heals. Let's be curious. Kate.
I'll also go back to my freshman self and just say, attach yourself to the people that inspire you. It's so much more important to be with the people that you are learning from and inspired by and passionate about than it is to follow the fanciest title or the thing that you're being pressured to do. Is follow the people. Really attaching yourself to those people just will make a very fundamentally successful kind of life.
I love that. Thank you, Kate. Wayne.
I'll go to the 90-year-old self, because I was at an event today where we celebrated our oldest community members, and I realized that I want to make it to 90, so I'll be happy if I do. So my 90-year-old self would tell me that the universe does bend towards justice, and hopefully things are better for my children, my grandchildren, everybody in our community, that we all played a role. And I hope that the organizations I ran, that new leadership came in and did better and bigger things for the community than I ever accomplished, because this is really a collective effort of all of us working together.
Absolutely. Kate, Renee, Wayne, thank you so much for the work you do. Thank you for sharing your energy and your expertise with us. Cathy, thank you for bringing these wonderful people together. I have so many follow-ups and questions and wants. And so I can't wait for what the future is for you three and us four and everyone else on this call. So thank you so much. And with that, I will turn it back over to Joanna Aguirre.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. Okay, I just have a few words to share. Okay. Good evening, and thank you once again for joining us tonight for our 5th edition of Cal for All. I am Joanna Aguirre, she, her. I'm the Senior Program Operating Officer at the Cal Alumni Association, and I joined today from Alumni territory in Oakland, California. I am a white presenting woman with a wavy blonde hair, wearing dark rimmed glasses, a white shirt with a navy blue sweater cardigan. Behind me is a virtual background of the UC Berkeley Campanile Tower with clouds and shadowed hills. I'm grateful once again to be in community with you all for our special homecoming edition of Cal for All. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our inspirational alumni speakers and the amazing work being done on campus and within our alumni community. I'm truly honored to be part of this program, and I'm grateful for everyone involved with this important series. The Cal Alumni Association has one purpose: to serve our Berkeley community. The first University of California graduates created the Alumni Association to ensure that future students would never be without community after Cal. Over the 150 years that we have existed, we have offered programs to connect, engage, inspire alumni to remain connected to UC Berkeley for life. And our goal remains steadfast to continue this work into the future. We strive to create an inclusive, vibrant community where alumni worldwide enjoy lifelong relationships with the university. The Cal Alumni Association is an independent, nonprofit membership organization with many programs and departments to fit the needs of our diverse alumni community. We have over 50 affinity, cultural, and US-based regional chapter networks for alumni to stay connected after their time at Cal. We publish California Magazine, an award-winning and editorially independent publication, sharing stories about the world of Berkeley and Berkeley in the world. Cal Discoveries Travel, a global educational alumni travel program for lifelong learners. Lair of the Bear, an outdoor camp and retreat center in Pinecrest, California. We offer a robust range of volunteer opportunities to support undergraduate scholarships and student programming. The Achievement Award Program, or TAP, the Leadership Award, African American Initiative Scholarship, the Mildred Jordan Sharp Scholarship, the Cal Pride Scholarship, as well as the Native American Scholarship. We are also proud of the Cal Alumni Mentors Program, which connects alumni and students from first-generation, historically underserved and underrepresented communities, as well as Pell Grant recipients at Cal. The Cal Alumni Association is committed to ensuring a Cal for all, and this event celebrates and recognizes the work being done by our alumni in our community, on the UC Berkeley campus and through our alumni chapters. We hope that those attendants today leave with more information about what others are doing and how you yourself can make an impact in your community. We celebrate lifelong, multifaceted relationships between alumni and our university, relationships which encompass learning, achievement, advocacy, service, philanthropy, and so much more. By cultivating inclusive experiences for alumni, we hope to contribute to an alumni culture that celebrates its diversity, creates belonging, and advances equity at UC Berkeley. I want to thank Dr. Yvette Gullatt and our alumni panelists for your partnership on this event. I'm grateful for your time and dedication to UC Berkeley and the Cal alumni community. I also want to thank Susie Cohen-Crumpler for her commitment to advancing the purpose of the Cal Alumni Association for the last 16 years. It has been a privilege to work alongside her for many years, and I wish her the best of luck in her next chapter beyond CAA. Truly, thank you for all your hard work and dedication. We will miss you. Please take the time to complete the post-event survey that will pop up when this event ends. It will also be sent via email. We welcome your feedback so that we can continue to make improvements. To learn more about the Cal Alumni Association and the DEI-BJ work being done on the UC Berkeley campus, please visit alumni.berkeley.edu and diversity.berkeley.edu. And now if you'd like to pull out your smartphone, I have 2 QR codes to share. Today, we invite you to make full use of the Cal Alumni community by joining your alumni association at a discounted rate. Members tonight, or participants tonight, you can become a life member and get up to 40% off our regular rates, as well as an exclusive Cal Alumni tote bag. Use this QR code now, or use the link in the post-event email that you will receive tomorrow. Please scan this QR code if you would like to learn more about the work of Dr. Gullatt and the UC Graduate, Undergraduate, and Equity Affairs. I will leave it up on the screen. Thank you for joining us tonight. Fiat Lux, happy homecoming, and go Bears.